I could finally give up the grind and live a life of pure leisure. On the morning of our third wedding anniversary, my wife, the powerful CEO of the Sterling Group, handed me a stack of divorce papers. "Sign this," she said coldly. "The $500 million in the account will be your severance package." On the outside, I remained perfectly stoic, but inside my heart was racing with pure excitement. $500 million was more than enough. It was finally time for me to retire and enjoy my life. The last 3 years playing the role of the useless house husband had felt like a prison sentence, and I was finally getting my freedom back. To my surprise, Miriam Sterling suddenly shuddered, her eyes widening with a mix of shock and total disbelief. From that moment forward, she started looking at me as if I were some kind of strange creature she had never seen before. Beneath my lazy exterior, the soul of the financial titan who once ruled Wall Street was beginning to stir. Her voice cut through the air like a shard of ice, striking my heart. I looked up at the woman standing across from me. She was my wife in name only and the most formidable business executive in San Francisco. She was dressed in a sharp white power suit with her hair pinned up, revealing her elegant and pale neck. Behind her gold-rimmed glasses, her eyes were completely devoid of warmth, staring at me as if I were just some stranger on the street. She slid the divorce settlement across the polished mahogany table toward me. "Our marriage has lasted 3 years," she stated in a flat, monotonous voice. "During that time, you never held a job. My family provided for your every need, and I believe I have been more than generous with you." I remained silent and simply observed her. With her grandfather in critical condition and the Sterling Group under siege from competitors, she clearly needed a strategic marriage to maintain her grip on power. She hesitated for a second before continuing with a tone of cold charity. "If you sign this, you get $500 million. That is plenty for you to live a comfortable life without ever having to lift a finger again." I picked up the black card and spun it idly between my fingers. To an average person, this was an unimaginable fortune. To the man I was 3 years ago, the legendary trader known as Pluto who terrified Wall Street, this was pocket change from a 10-minute trade. I had built a $1 trillion financial empire with my own 2 hands. Unfortunately, the stress caught up to me, and I collapsed from a fatal heart attack in my office on the day I turned 30. When I finally woke up again, I found myself in the body of a man named Edward Harrison. He was a desperate soul who had agreed to become a kept man for the Sterling family just to pay for his mother's surgery. My initial plan was to rebuild my kingdom, but the frailty of this new body and the sheer exhaustion from my previous life changed my mind. I was done with the corporate rat race and the backstabbing. I decided I just wanted to be a lazy slacker for the rest of my days. I spent the last 3 years playing the part of a useless husband perfectly. My routine consisted of nothing but gaming and sleeping. I stayed out of the way and made sure I never caused Miriam any unnecessary headaches. I had been patiently waiting for the day she would finally ask for a divorce. Once I had that money, I would be free to go wherever I wanted and live exactly how I pleased. I was laughing like a maniac on the inside because $500 million was a dream come true. Pretending to be a loser for 3 years had been a nightmare. Staring at her frozen, emotionless face every morning was enough to give anyone a permanent case of stomach ulcers. Now that I was finally off the hook, I could buy a private island. I would spend my days in board shorts and flip-flops, sipping cold drinks and watching beautiful women on the beach. It was going to be paradise. I was nearly vibrating with joy, but I made sure my face looked like my entire world was ending. I let my hands shake as I spoke in a broken, raspy voice. "Miriam, please tell me there's some way to fix this, because my love for you is too deep to lose." "That is enough," Miriam snapped, cutting me off with clear irritation. However, her face suddenly went pale as a sheet. She gripped her temples, and her eyes were filled with a terrifying sense of confusion. I was confused by her reaction because she was supposed to be looking at me with disgust. Instead, she looked like she had just seen a ghost. I wondered if I had overacted so much that she was actually starting to feel guilty about dumping me. I was begging her internally not to change her mind. My island and the beautiful women on the sand were waiting for me. I needed her to stay the course so I could get out of there and start my real life. Panic started to set in as I picked up the pen. I put on my best performance of a broken man who had lost all hope, ready to sign my name and secure my future. "Stop," Miriam commanded, her voice trembling. Her breathing was heavy and her chest was heaving as she stared at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. She looked like she was witnessing something impossible. She wondered if she was losing her mind or hearing things. The thoughts running through Edward's head were matching the voices in her mind perfectly. He actually thought she gave him stomach issues, and he was planning to watch girls on a beach with the money. The fact that he was actually happy about the $500 million settlement shattered her entirely. entire perception of him. Miriam was reeling from a level of psychological shock she had never experienced before. Throughout their entire marriage, Edward had acted like a pathetic, frightened shadow of a man. She had been convinced that he was hopelessly in love with her and would be destroyed if they ever parted ways. She had come prepared with a speech to handle his inevitable tears and begging. Instead, she found that he wasn't sad at all. He was actually celebrating internally, as if he had just won the biggest lottery in history. She stammered, pointing a finger at me while struggling to find her words. I was screaming at her in my head to just let me sign the papers before the government offices closed for the day. I couldn't understand why she was being so indecisive when she was usually so sharp in the boardroom. While I was insulting her sluggishness mentally, I kept up the act of being on the verge of a total emotional breakdown. Miriam, I realize I am not in your league, and if you think the money is too much, I will give it back because all I want is you. Be quiet, she yelled, cutting me off instantly. Miriam stood up so fast her chair almost flew back. Her thoughts were a chaotic mess because she was watching this man lie to her face while he was busy deciding between a vacation in Hawaii or the Maldives. She wondered if one of them had truly lost their mind. She took a long, shaky breath and decided that she was not going to let him sign those papers just yet. I need more time to think about this, she said as she grabbed her bag. She didn't even look back at me as she practically ran out of the office in a state of total panic. I sat there frozen with the pen hovering over the signature line. I was devastated because my $500 million and my dream retirement were walking right out the door. I was screaming in agony on the inside, but I kept my face looking confused and lost. As I watched her disappear down the hallway, I started to wonder what had gone wrong with my plan. There was definitely something wrong with her today. I went back to my place, which was really just a small guest house on the edge of the Sterling estate. My life as a kept man was mostly confined to this small space for the last 3 years. Miriam hadn't come home yet, which was a relief because I really enjoyed the silence. I pulled up my laptop and logged into a private offshore trading platform. A small smile crept across my face as I stared at the familiar market charts on the screen. Just because I wanted to be a slacker didn't mean I wanted to be poor. I had taken the small monthly allowance Miriam gave me and traded it into a secret 9-figure fortune over the last few years. Making money was as natural as breathing to someone with my background. I noticed that Joey Miller, a complete moron, was trying to pump up the stock for Astrotech and was trying to trick Miriam into investing with him. Joey was practically begging for financial ruin because Astrotech's books were more fraudulent than a $3 bill. Some major firms were going to short the stock next week, and the price was going to collapse into nothingness. I planned to ride that wave down and make enough profit to upgrade my future island. While I was busy making trades, Miriam was back in the main house, sitting on her sofa and rubbing her temples. My thoughts were still echoing in her head with perfect clarity. She thought about Astrotech and Joey Miller, the wealthy playboy who claimed to be the best investor in the city. Joey had been relentlessly pitching the Astrotech deal to her, claiming it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He promised that if the Sterling Group backed it, the stock value would triple overnight. Her uncle Howard and his cronies on the board were already pushing her to sign the deal. She began to wonder if the things she heard in Edward's head were actually true. She immediately felt stupid for even considering it. How could a lazy husband who spent his entire life playing video games know anything about short selling or corporate auditing? She decided it had to be a stress-induced hallucination. She shook her head violently, trying to clear the ridiculous voices from her consciousness. She grabbed her phone and dialed her assistant. Lisa, I need the best private investigator you can find to look into someone for me. Also, I want every scrap of raw, unedited financial data on Astrotech because I need to know exactly what is happening behind the scenes. After she ended the call, she stared out the window at the soft glow coming from my guest house. Her expression was a complicated mix of doubt and curiosity. The next evening was the weekly family dinner at the Sterling Mansion. I took my usual spot at the very end of the table and focused entirely on my food. The family usually ate in total silence, but that tradition was about to be interrupted. Miriam, we need an answer on the Astrotech investment with the Miller Group. Her uncle Howard was the one who spoke, looking at her with an expectant grin. Howard was a heavy man with a beer belly and eyes that always seemed to be calculating how to steal more money. Miriam set her fork down and told him plainly that she was rejecting the project due to the high risk involved. Howard slammed his hand onto the table and shouted that she was being ridiculous. He argued that Joey Miller was a genius and that missing this opportunity would be a disaster for the Sterling Group. Her cousin Kevin joined in with a sneer, suggesting that she had become weak and cowardly. He made a pointed comment about how the family had no room for lazy people or the useless losers who dragged them down. He glared directly at me as he spoke, but I just ignored him and took a large bite of the steak. steak. It was delicious, and I wasn't going to let him ruin my meal. I thought to myself that Howard was a complete moron for being played so easily. The land in the western suburbs was so contaminated with heavy metals that even a stray dog wouldn't walk on it. Yet he was trying to build luxury condos there. Kevin was even worse, a spoiled brat who only knew how to chase aspiring models and waste money. I remembered when he got into that legal trouble at nightclub and had to use $1 million of company money to make the problem go away quietly. It was only a matter of time before those two parasites drained the entire Sterling fortune dry. My internal commentary was playing like a high-definition soundtrack inside Miriam's head. Her grip on her water glass tightened until her knuckles turned white. She was horrified by the information about the land contamination and Kevin's secret theft of company funds. Joey Miller had told her the land was prime real estate that just needed a new access road. She had never heard a single rumor about Kevin using the business accounts to cover up his personal scandals. Kevin asked her why she was staring at me like that, since he felt extremely uncomfortable under her gaze. He couldn't understand why she was paying any attention to a man she usually ignored. Howard let out an annoyed grunt and told her to stop changing the subject. He insisted that the deal was going through regardless of her opinion, and that he had already scheduled the signing with Joey Miller for the next day. Miriam took a steadying breath and looked away from me. She fixed her cold, icy gaze on Howard's arrogant face. She told her uncle that before they proceeded, he needed to explain exactly who had authorized the environmental impact report for the suburban property he wanted to trade. Then she turned to Kevin and demanded to know where the missing $1 million from the company account had gone. She asked him specifically which nightclub and which girl he had spent the firm's money on. The room went completely silent, as if a bomb had just gone off. Howard's smug grin vanished instantly, and Kevin looked like he was about to faint from terror. Kevin started shaking and stuttering as he asked her what kind of evidence she thought she had to back up such a wild accusation. Kevin's panicked reaction made it obvious to everyone that the accusations were true. Howard started sweating profusely and tried to claim that someone was just feeding her lies to destroy the family. She replied that it would be very easy to find the truth by simply auditing the books and looking at the real survey data for the land. Her words were quiet, but they hit her relatives with the force of a sledgehammer. Arthur Sterling, the patriarch of the family who had been sitting silently with his eyes closed, finally looked up. His sharp gaze moved from his trembling son and grandson to Miriam. He told Howard that Miriam was the one in charge and that her decisions regarding the company were final. Howard opened his mouth to protest, but one look from the old man silenced him immediately. The family conflict ended just as quickly as it had started. I kept my head down and continued eating like I hadn't heard a word, but my mind was still full of insults for all of them. I was impressed by how quickly she handled the situation. She actually looked like a real leader for once, unlike her moronic uncle who was just a puppet for the Miller family. She had officially made enemies of Howard and Joey Miller, and I knew they would team up to take her down. It was going to be a massive headache for everyone involved. I started worrying that my peaceful life as a slacker was in danger. I needed to convince her to sign those divorce papers immediately so I could take my money and disappear before things got ugly. Miriam took a sip of her water to hide the fact that she was almost smiling. She was becoming obsessed with finding out who Edward really was. To her, he was a contradiction, appearing as a brilliant strategist who saw through every trap while acting like a lazy coward who only cared about escaping his responsibilities. The sheer difference between his thoughts and his actions was both ridiculous and fascinating to her. I was heading back to my guest house after dinner when Miriam called out for me to stop. I turned around and wondered if she was going to thank me for the help. I hoped she wouldn't, because I wanted no part of her life, and I certainly wasn't interested in a woman as cold as an ice queen. A faint blush appeared on Miriam's cheeks for a split second before she regained her composure. She reached into her bag and handed me a new titanium bank card. She told me there was $10 million in the account for my monthly spending money. I was shocked because she usually only gave me $50,000. I thought to myself that I had truly hit the jackpot with this wealthy woman. I wondered if she was trying to buy my loyalty so I wouldn't want the divorce anymore. It seemed like a desperate move to keep me under her thumb by throwing cash at me. I told myself that her plan was incredibly manipulative and that I was a man of integrity who couldn't be bought. Then, without missing a beat, I snatched the card and tucked it safely into my pocket. I gave her a simple thanks and called her honey, which clearly made her want to punch me. She was obviously frustrated by how shameless I could be. "Edward," she said while trying to stay calm, "I want to know your professional opinion on the Astrotech investment." I knew this was a trap to see if I was smarter than I let on. I thought to myself that the company was a dumpster fire that no sane person would ever invest in. I realized I had to maintain my cover as a complete idiot. I forced a confused confused look onto my face as if I didn't even understand the question. I asked her if she was talking about that video game developer, mentioning that their games were terrible and the in-game purchases were a total ripoff. Miriam looked at me with a deep frown, frustrated by my act. If she hadn't heard my actual thoughts, she really would have believed I was just another uneducated gamer. She felt like I was a mystery she couldn't solve no matter how hard she tried. She told me to just go back to my room. Miriam walked away to get some rest while I headed back to my guest house, feeling pretty good about the situation. I was grinning from ear to ear as I looked at the balance in my bank account. The $10 million was more than enough to cover the luxury renovations for my future private island. She was being so generous that I started thinking about staying married for a few more weeks just to see how much more cash I could get out of her. Miriam nearly tripped over her own feet when she heard that last thought. She couldn't believe that her own husband viewed her as nothing more than a cash cow to be milked for every cent. Miriam spent the entire night fuming and barely got any sleep. The next morning, the mood in the executive wing of the Sterling Group was incredibly tense. The marketing director asked her if she was serious about backing out of the Miller deal. He warned her that Joey Miller was threatening to rally other firms to destroy their market share if she didn't comply. Other executives agreed, reminding her that the Millers were too powerful to antagonize while the company was already struggling with internal issues. Miriam looked tired as she rubbed her eyes, her head still spinning from all the strange things she had heard in my mind the night before. I was thinking that the idea of Joey Miller leading a market blockade was hilarious. The guy couldn't even read a basic stock chart, so his threats were completely empty. I knew exactly how to turn his own capital against him to boost our stock price and leave him bankrupt if he was stupid enough to try something. I wondered if Miriam would be happy enough to give me another $10 million bonus if I saved the company. Those thoughts were repeating in her head like a constant loop. The director cleared his throat to get her attention. Miriam focused on the room and told everyone with absolute certainty that the deal was off. She ordered the immediate termination of all discussions with the Millers and told the finance department to prepare for a major stock buyback. The room erupted into chaos as the executives begged her to reconsider. They were convinced she was declaring a suicidal war against the Miller family. Miriam was the only one who knew she wasn't gambling on her own skills. She was betting on the man who was currently at home playing games, the man who had casually predicted he could ruin her rivals. By that afternoon, the entire city was buzzing with the news that the Sterling Group had officially insulted the Miller family by rejecting their partnership. Joey Miller was absolutely livid and smashed an expensive antique vase against the wall. He screamed that he had tried to be nice to Miriam and that she was going to regret disrespecting him. He couldn't believe she had chosen a useless husband over him. He vowed to watch her empire crumble without his help. With a twisted expression, he called his lead trader and ordered them to destroy the Sterling Group's stock price. He wanted their shares to be worthless, and he wanted Miriam on her knees begging for mercy. The financial war began in earnest while I was lounging in my backyard wearing sunglasses and enjoying the sun. I was humming to myself, knowing that Joey had taken a bait. I wanted him to dump as much stock as possible so I could make a killing when the market turned. Once he ran out of resources, I was going to shut the trap on him. I took a slow sip of my soda and enjoyed the show as if I were just an innocent bystander. The Sterling Group's stock price began to crash as Joey flooded the market with sell orders. The office was in a total panic and the board of directors was getting hundreds of angry calls. Everyone was blaming Miriam for the disaster, saying her ego had destroyed the company. Howard was busy rallying the board members to vote for her immediate removal. Miriam was all alone in her massive office, her heart pounding as she watched the stock charts tank. The pressure was nearly breaking her. Suddenly, her phone rang with a call from a number she didn't recognize, and she hesitated before finally picking it up. A distorted, computer-generated voice asked her if she wanted to win this war. Miriam gasped and demanded to know who was calling her. The voice told her that his identity didn't matter, but his information did. He instructed her to put every single dollar she had into call options for a company called Blue Ocean Tech at exactly 3 o'clock. Miriam asked if he was insane because Blue Ocean Tech was a tiny, irrelevant firm with a stock price that never moved. She argued that it was nothing more than a blind gamble, but the voice simply told her to take it or leave it before hanging up. She stood there in silence, her mind suddenly racing back to the thing she had heard Edward thinking about the night before. I had been thinking about how Joey Miller was a fool for diverting the money he needed for the Blue Ocean Tech acquisition just to attack the Sterling Group. He thought he was being clever, but he had no idea that his father's biggest business rival was already moving in on Blue Ocean's valuable patents. The second that news hit the wire the next day, the stock was going to explode. Not only would Joey fail to hurt the Sterling Group, but he would also bankrupt his own father in the process. I thought about how entertaining it would be to see them both lose everything at once. Miriam realized that all the pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. She was convinced that the mysterious caller was Edward. Even though he was sitting at home in his pajamas, he was somehow manipulating the entire financial market. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she watched her company's value drop while the clock ticked toward 3. She had 10 minutes to make a choice that would either save her empire or destroy it forever. Staying the course meant certain failure anyway, so she had to decide if she trusted the voice in her head. She took a final deep breath and opened her eyes with a new sense of purpose. She picked up the phone and told her CFO to move every cent of their liquid assets into blue ocean tech options immediately. The CFO screamed that she was being insane and that they should be using that money to stabilize their own stock instead of throwing it away on a stranger's company. She told him to just do his job and hung up. She collapsed back in her chair, her body trembling with adrenaline and fear. She had risked everything the Sterling family owned based on a few random thoughts she had overheard. If this failed, she would be remembered as the person who destroyed the family legacy. The clock struck 3 and a breaking news alert suddenly appeared on the financial news network. The reporter announced that the tech giant Vanguard Systems had just completed a surprise acquisition of Blue Ocean Tech to secure its new patents. Miriam jumped to her feet and stared at the television as the Blue Ocean Tech stock chart turned into a vertical line. The numbers were skyrocketing so fast it was hard to believe. It hit 500% and then exploded to 1,000% in minutes. The value had increased tenfold in under an hour, and her office phone started ringing incessantly. Her CFO was practically sobbing with joy as he told her they had just cleared $30 billion in profit. $30 billion was enough to save the company and turn it into a global powerhouse. Miriam felt her legs give out and she collapsed in her chair, gasping for air as the reality set in. She had actually pulled it off. While she celebrated, Joey Miller's office was deathly quiet. Joey could only stare at the screen in horror as his accounts were wiped out because he couldn't cover the losses from his short positions. He felt like his entire life had been destroyed. He couldn't understand how the secret acquisition had been leaked to the public so perfectly. He had stolen the acquisition fund from his father to attack Miriam, and now he had lost every cent of his family's wealth. He had failed to destroy Miriam and had instead bankrupted the entire Miller family. It was all over for him. Joey was a broken man on the floor while the Sterling Group headquarters turned into one big party. Howard, who had been trying to lead a coup against her an hour ago, was now too terrified to even speak. All the board members who had doubted her were now flooding her phone with compliments. They were calling her a genius and claiming they had always believed in her leadership. Miriam looked at their fake smiles with total contempt. She didn't respond to any of them and immediately dialed my number instead. I was still in my backyard relaxing because I knew the company was safe and $30 billion richer. I was impressed that she actually had the guts to go all in on my tip. She reminded me of my own younger days on Wall Street. I figured this was the perfect time to get that divorce finalized so I could finally leave for my island paradise. Miriam's voice came through the phone asking where I was, and I told her I was just hanging out of the house. She told me to stay put and hung up. 30 minutes later, her red Ferrari came screaming into the driveway and screeched to a halt in front of my door. She stepped out of the car looking incredible in casual clothes instead of her usual business suit. She looked less like a boss and more like a beautiful woman. She stood right in front of my lounge chair and stared down at me in total silence. Her intense gaze was starting to make me nervous. I wondered if she was so happy about the money that she was going to try and seduce me. I told myself that even though she was gorgeous, her cold personality was a total deal breaker for me. I much preferred the idea of a fun, energetic woman over her icy demeanor. Miriam's face began to darken, as if she could hear exactly what I was thinking. She gritted her teeth and asked me who I really was. I knew the moment of truth had arrived. I realized I couldn't dodge her questions anymore. I told myself that I was just her husband, a simple man who wanted to be taken care of. There was no way I could explain that I was a legendary Wall Street tycoon who had been reincarnated. Nobody would believe me, and they would probably just commit me to a psych ward. I rubbed the back of my neck and gave her my best innocent smile, claiming that I had no idea what she was talking about. She screamed at me to stop lying, pointing out that I had predicted every single detail of the stock war and her family's betrayal. She insisted that I wasn't the lazy gamer she had married. She kept walking toward me, forcing me to back away. I realized she was too sharp for my usual excuses now. I panicked for a moment before coming up with a new plan to distract her. I looked at her with a fake expression of terror and stammered that everything I'd said was just a lucky guess. She laughed mockingly and asked how a blind guess could possibly be that precise, especially the part about the stock price price increasing tenfold. I quickly made up a story about seeing a financial expert on TV late at night while I was getting a glass of water. I claimed the old man on the screen had explained everything, and I just happened to remember it. She looked at me suspiciously and demanded to know the name of the show and the expert. I told her the show was called Wealth Secrets, and the expert was a man named Neil Alwa. I was silently congratulating myself on my quick thinking. Miriam looked like she was going to explode when she heard the ridiculous name I had invented. She took out her phone and told her assistant to look up the man and the show immediately. I was terrified because I didn't expect her to actually verify my lie. I couldn't believe she was being so thorough. I was starting to panic as the minutes ticked by, desperate for a way to save the situation. Then, her assistant called back with the results of the search. The assistant confirmed over the speakerphone that no such man or show existed. The silence that followed was unbearable, and I felt like the biggest idiot on the planet. Miriam hung up the phone and gave me a look that said she had caught me red-handed. She asked me if I had any other fairy tales to tell her, making sure to mock the name I had just invented. My face was burning with embarrassment, so I decided to lean into the absurdity. I told her that I was actually a mystical master who could read the stars to predict the future. I figured a mystical excuse was so ridiculous she couldn't possibly disprove it. As long as I didn't admit the truth, she couldn't prove anything. Miriam actually found my stubbornness somewhat amusing. She realized that the more she learned about me, the less she actually understood. She saw me as a brilliant mastermind one moment and a ridiculous con artist the next. She played along and asked me to use my mystical powers to predict the next challenge for the Sterling Group. I knew this was another test. I thought about how Marcus Miller would be out for blood now that his son was ruined, and he was much more dangerous than Joey. Marcus controlled the chemical company that supplied most of our raw materials. If he decided to cut us off, our entire production line would grind to a halt in weeks. I knew a company called Everstrong Industries had a new eco-friendly material that was actually better and cheaper than what Marcus offered. Securing an exclusive deal with Everstrong would solve all our supply problems and give us a huge advantage over the competition. The CEO of Everstrong was a man named Dave, a notoriously stubborn guy who only cared about engineering. I remembered that his one weakness was his obsession with professional chess. While I was planning everything out of my head, I just closed my eyes and told her that I couldn't reveal the secrets of the universe. Miriam heard every detail of my plan while watching me play my mystical master character. She gave me a knowing look, but decided to let the matter drop for now. She told me not to let her down before getting back in her car and driving away. I was relieved that I had managed to distract her for another day. I had no idea that Miriam spent her afternoon having Lisa research everything about Dave and his love for professional chess. Miriam went to meet Dave the following morning and found him exactly as I had described. He was a brilliant but grumpy man who didn't care about corporate titles. Even though she was the most powerful executive in the city, he refused to even see her and had his secretary send her away. The secretary explained that Dave was busy with research and wasn't taking appointments, leaving Miriam's team frustrated and embarrassed. Her staff started complaining about how disrespectful Dave was being to her. Miriam told her team to be quiet. She looked at the modest office building and smiled because everything was going exactly as Edward's thoughts had predicted. The research had confirmed that Dave was a grandmaster-level chess player who was obsessed with the game. She told her team they were leaving, and they were shocked she was giving up so easily. She told them she wasn't giving up and that they would be back the next day with a better plan. That evening, Miriam surprised me by coming to the guest house. I was in my most comfortable clothes, focused on an online chess match. I was really enjoying my relaxing evening until she walked in without knocking and caught me looking like a total mess. I panicked and tried to close the browser because I didn't want her to see that I was ranked as a world-class player. She asked me what I was doing while looking over my shoulder at the intense game on the screen. I was currently playing against a national champion while using my anonymous account named Lazy Slacker. I had just demolished his defensive line, and he was expressing his total shock in the chat window. The champion admitted defeat and asked who I was, so I quickly closed the window and told Miriam I was just clicking random buttons. Miriam looked at me with a knowing expression but didn't say anything about the game. She sat down and asked me to teach her how to play. I asked her why she wanted to learn now when she had the big meeting the next morning. I told her it was way too late for a crash course. I made a comment about how she probably wouldn't even understand the basic moves by morning, which clearly made her angry. She repeated her demand with an intensity that told me I didn't have a choice. I realized she wasn't going to take no for an answer, so I agreed to show her the basics. I spent hours explaining the fundamental strategies to her until my throat was sore and she still looked completely lost. I thought to myself that she had zero natural talent for the game, and there was no way she could ever beat a professional like Dave. I decided to just write down a specific set of moves to counter Dave's favorite opening and have her memorize them by heart so she could bluff her way through the meeting. While I was complaining about her lack of skill, I carefully prepared the cheat sheet for her. She sat there pretending to focus on my words while listening to every single one of my thoughts. She memorized all my strategic advice from my internal monologue. She thought to herself that I was actually quite helpful even if I was being incredibly insulting. We spent the rest of the night going through the motions until morning came. Miriam arrived at Dave's office ready for another attempt. The secretary tried to block her again, but Miriam cut her off before she could finish the sentence. She handed the secretary a flash drive and told her to tell Dave that she wanted to discuss a specific advanced strategy with him. The secretary looked skeptical, but took the drive inside anyway. A few moments later, Dave himself came running out to meet her. He was practically vibrating with excitement and invited her into his office immediately, treating her like an old friend. Her staff couldn't believe the sudden change in atmosphere. Dave was acting like a kid on Christmas as he looked at the strategic data she had provided. He kept shouting about how brilliant the move on the 37th turn was and how it completely destroyed a classic defensive formation. He asked her if she had come up with the strategy herself, and she just gave him a cool, confident nod. She told him it was just something she had come up with in her spare time. I was thinking to myself that she was a bold liar considering I had to treat her like a toddler during our lesson. I thought about how naturally she could act the part of genius. Her ears turned slightly red at my mental commentary. Dave was so impressed that he stopped viewing the meeting as a business negotiation and started treating her like a fellow master. Miriam secured the exclusive supply deal with almost no effort, and the price was significantly better than what they had been paying. Her team was celebrating the huge win in the car, amazed that their boss was secretly a world-class chess strategist. They joked that Dave would have probably done anything she asked after seeing that strategy. Miriam just sat in the back of the car and stared out the window. She knew that the entire victory was because of Edward. She thought about the man who was currently at home in his shorts, calling her a complete idiot. She felt a sudden need to be near him. As soon as she got home, she skipped the main house and went straight to my door. I was busy looking at tropical vacation spots and debating between a villa in Bali or a private island in the Maldives. I was having a hard time deciding when Miriam walked in and interrupted my daydreaming. I asked her what she wanted now, feeling a bit annoyed. She didn't say anything and just stood right in front of me. She leaned over and gave me a soft kiss on my cheek. Her skin was warm, and I could smell the subtle scent of her perfume. I was completely frozen in shock. I couldn't believe she had actually kissed me. I wondered what had happened to the cold, distant woman I had married. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. I was used to her being angry or dismissive, not affectionate. She smiled at my stunned expression while listening to the chaos in my head. Her face was slightly flushed, but she looked very happy as she told me it was my reward for the help. She didn't wait for me to say anything and practically ran out of the room. I was left there by myself, completely confused by what had just happened. I touched my cheek where she had kissed me, feeling the warmth of her lips. I realized that my plan to leave was becoming much harder to follow. Marcus Miller, the head of the Miller Empire, was sitting in his office looking like he wanted to kill someone. He roared at his assistant, demanding to know how they had lost the supply contract to the Sterling family. The secretary was shaking as he explained that Miriam had secured Everstrong's new technology and their clients were all switching sides. Marcus crushed his cigar and screamed that Miriam had destroyed his son's reputation and was now coming for his fortune. He vowed that she would pay for her arrogance. His eyes were full of murderous rage as he promised to not only bankrupt the Sterling Group, but to destroy them so completely they could never recover. He picked up his phone and called his head of security, telling him to get a team ready to head out. I had no idea what was coming. I was still feeling extremely awkward around Miriam after that kiss. Every time she walked into a room, my heart would start racing. I was worried that I was actually starting to develop feelings for her. I told myself to stay focused because a relationship would only ruin my plans for a lazy life. That evening, Miriam came home and handed me a formal invitation. She told me I was going to the annual charity gala with her in 3 days. I immediately told her I wasn't interested. I hated those kinds of events where everyone just pretended to be nice while trying to outdo each other. I told her I would much rather stay home and play my games. She mentioned that the final item up for auction was a historical chess set that had once belonged to a world champion. My eyes widened in an instant. I was a huge fan of that champion, and owning his personal chess set was a dream of mine. I tried to act like I was doing her a favor by agreeing to go. I told her that I would only go to make sure she was safe and supported. Miriam smiled knowingly and thanked me. 3 days later, we arrived at the gala. I put on the custom suit she had bought for me, and I actually looked quite sharp. Miriam looked stunning in a deep blue gown, and she drew everyone's attention the moment we walked walked through the doors. Everyone was staring at her beauty while wondering what she was doing with a man like me. People were whispering about the useless husband she had brought along. They were laughing at me, saying that even an expensive suit couldn't hide my lack of class. I could hear their insults, but I didn't let it bother me. I'd been a target of their jokes for 3 years, and I was used to it. Miriam's expression darkened as she heard them. She pulled my arm closer to her, making a public statement that we were a couple. I was touched by how protective she was being. I decided that if anyone tried to mess with her tonight, I would actually step in and handle it. Miriam felt a sense of warmth after hearing my thoughts. Just then, an annoying voice interrupted us. Marcus Miller approached us with a drink in his hand and a fake smile on his face. He acted like we were old friends, but I could see the pure hatred in his eyes behind the smile. I knew he was up to something. Marcus was a dangerous man who loved to strike when people least expected it. He wanted revenge for what happened to Joey, but he was making a mistake if he thought I was still a defenseless loser. Miriam felt his hostility and stepped in front of me, telling him that she wasn't interested in any of his games tonight. Marcus told her not to be so defensive and tried to look as innocent as possible. He looked at me with total disgust and said he wanted to meet the man who was supposedly a genius at investing. He was trying to humiliate me by setting expectations that everyone knew I couldn't meet. He wanted to make me look like a joke in front of the entire elite crowd. I stayed silent and watched his little performance. I thought to myself that Marcus looked like a man who was about to have a very bad night. I predicted that he was heading for a disaster. Miriam stood her ground and told Marcus to act with some dignity. Marcus glared at me with pure venom and told me he would be waiting to see exactly when my luck ran out. He stormed off, and the event continued until the auction finally began. The famous chess set was brought out onto the stage. I was determined to win it. The bidding started at $1 million and quickly began to rise. The price hit $3 million when Marcus suddenly shouted out a bid for $5 million. He gave me a smug look that said I was out of my league if I thought I could outbid him. I was annoyed that he was just trying to drive up the price to spite me. I decided it wasn't worth the trouble and was ready to let it go. I let my face show frustration to keep up the act. Miriam glanced at me but remained silent. Just as the auction was closing, Miriam raised her paddle and bid $10 million. The entire room gasped at the sheer insanity of the price. Marcus looked stunned that she was willing to waste $10 million on a collector's item just for me. He tried to outbid her again with $11 million, but Miriam immediately jumped to $20 million without a second thought. Her voice was cold and commanding, making it clear she would not stop. Marcus finally backed down because he realized he was about to spend a fortune on something he didn't even want. Miriam won the auction and handed the chess set to me, asking if I was happy with it. I looked at the set and felt a mix of guilt and joy. $20 million was a ridiculous amount of money that could have bought several smaller islands. Despite the cost, I couldn't help but feel a warm sensation in my chest. I realized my plan to stay detached was failing miserably. I took the set and whispered my thanks to her. We were headed to the car after the gala when I felt a sudden rush of movement coming from behind us. I reacted instantly, shoving Miriam out of the way and twisting my body just in time to dodge a heavy metal pipe. We were suddenly surrounded by a group of masked men armed with steel pipes. Their leader looked particularly vicious, like a hungry predator. I recognized him as Black Wolf, one of the most dangerous hired killers in the city. It was clear that Marcus Miller had decided that a simple humiliation wasn't enough. Miriam was terrified and demanded to know who they were, having never been in a violent situation before. Black Wolf ignored her and told me that someone had paid $5 million for my leg. He asked if I wanted to break it myself or if I wanted him to do it for me. I laughed and said that Marcus was being incredibly cheap by only offering $5 million for my leg. Black Wolf's expression grew even more dangerous as he realized I knew who had hired him. He decided he was going to have to kill me to keep the secret. I loosened my wrists and stepped in front of Miriam, telling her to close her eyes and not look. I was annoyed that I had to fight because I really just wanted a quiet life. They were giving me no choice but to show my true skills. I thought to myself that I could finish all of them in under 3 seconds. Instead of closing her eyes, Miriam stared at me with intense curiosity. She was eager to see exactly what I was capable of and how many more secrets I was keeping from her. Black Wolf was insulted by my confidence and ordered his men to attack and break my legs. The thugs charged at us with their pipes, swinging wildly. Miriam was terrified and gripped my jacket tightly. I gave her hand a gentle pat to calm her down, and then I made my move. I moved so fast that I was nothing more than a blur to the average eye. A series of heavy thuds echoed through the parking lot. You could hear the sound of bones snapping, followed by the screams of the the attackers as they hit the ground. All the men who had just been threatening us were now writhing on the pavement in total agony. It hadn't even been 3 seconds, and Black Wolf was the only one left on his feet. The killer's confident expression had vanished, replaced by pure terror because he hadn't even seen me move. He asked me what I was with a trembling voice, convinced that no normal human being could move that fast. I walked toward him slowly, making sure he felt every bit of my presence. I told him that my identity didn't matter. I stood right in front of him and told him that his only mistake was choosing the wrong target. I brought my foot down hard on his knee, and the sound of the bone breaking was clear. He let out a horrific scream and collapsed to the ground, clutching his shattered leg. Miriam was standing behind me with her hands over her mouth, completely stunned by the violence she had just witnessed. She knew I could fight, but she hadn't realized I was a lethal weapon. She looked at me as if I were a supernatural creature. I realized I had probably revealed a bit too much of my true nature. I worried that I had terrified her and that she was going to think I was some kind of dangerous psychopath. I cleared my throat and prepared a believable lie to explain away my combat skills. I told her that I'd spent several years in the military and had been trained in advanced hand-to-hand combat. She looked at me with a very skeptical expression. I added that I was part of a classified special operations unit, which is why there were no records of my service. I claimed that the military had also taught me everything I knew about finance and strategy. I thought to myself that the Special Forces excuse was the perfect cover for all my mysterious skills. Miriam just stared at me in silence. She clearly didn't believe a word of it because no army training could explain what she had just seen. She decided not to push for the truth. She realized that she didn't need to know everything as long as she knew that this powerful man was on her side. She told me it was time to go home and held onto my arm tightly as we walked back to the car. Marcus Miller was waiting in his study for a call confirming my death. When he found out his entire team had been hospitalized, he was speechless. He couldn't wrap his brain around the fact that one man had defeated a dozen armed professionals in less than 3 seconds. His informant told him that I was a literal monster and warned Marcus that I was probably coming for him next. Marcus felt a wave of pure terror wash over him. He realized that he had made a fatal mistake by targeting me. He knew he had to get out of the city immediately before I found him. He was frantically packing his bags when he opened the front door and saw me standing there in the dark. I was smiling at him in the moonlight and asked him exactly where he thought he was going at such a late hour. Marcus collapsed to the floor in terror and asked if I was a demon or a man. I told him I was there to settle the score. I walked into the house and closed the door behind me, telling him that I'd try to be peaceful, but he wouldn't let me. I looked at him as if he were already a corpse and told him that the games were finally over. He was so terrified that he actually lost control of his bladder. He threw himself onto his knees and started begging for his life. He called me master and offered me all his money and his entire company if I would just let him live. I laughed and told him that his wealth meant absolutely nothing to me. I was about to finish him off when my phone started ringing. It was Miriam. She asked where I was, and I told her I was just taking care of some personal matters. She asked if I was with Marcus and told me to come home. She begged me not to become a murderer and to let the legal system handle his crimes instead. Her voice was full of concern and love. I looked at the pathetic man at my feet and hesitated. I decided to spare him for her sake, knowing that the evidence I had collected of his financial crimes would destroy him just as effectively as a bullet. I called the police and gave them the location and the evidence to arrest Marcus for a laundry list of felonies. The city was rocked the next morning when news broke that Marcus Miller had been arrested for massive corporate fraud. The Miller Group collapsed, and Miriam was able to buy out all their remaining assets for pennies on the dollar. The Sterling Group became the most powerful force in the city's business world. Miriam was hailed as a legendary genius, though she knew the truth about who was actually behind her success. She knew that she would be nothing without Edward. The war with the Millers was finally over. She also removed Uncle Howard from a board and made sure he would never have power in the company again. With the chaos gone, I was looking forward to finally becoming a slacker again. Miriam came to see me that night. She was holding a folder, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw it was the divorce papers. I felt a surge of annoyance, thinking she was finally throwing me away now that I had saved her company. I decided to ask for even more money this time, since I had helped her earn $30 billion. I was busy calculating my new net worth while pretending to be heartbroken. Miriam looked like she wanted to laugh at my thoughts as she handed me the document. I took the pen and felt a little sad that my marriage was officially ending. I signed my name and watched her sign another set of papers. She slid the second document toward me, and I saw that it was a transfer of ownership for 30% of her company. She had just given me a stake in the company worth over $100 billion. I was completely shocked and asked her why she was giving me so much money. I wondered if she she was trying to buy my love so I would stay with her forever. She gave me a beautiful smile as she watched me struggle to process what was happening. She picked up the signed divorce agreement and slowly tore it into tiny pieces right in front of me. She told me that our old relationship was dead and that we were going to start a new life together. She stood up and pulled me into a long, passionate kiss that made it clear how she felt. When we finally pulled apart, she rested her head against my chest and spoke softly. She promised to buy me my island and even offered to wear the bikinis I was so obsessed with as long as I stayed with her. I was terrified because there was no way she could have known about my secret island and bikini fantasies. I realized there was only one explanation. I looked at her and whispered the word honey in my mind. She immediately turned bright red, confirming that she had heard me perfectly. She hid her face in my chest and gave a shy little nod. I realized that my secret was out and my life as a slacker was officially over. My dream of being a lazy slacker was gone and my entire understanding of our marriage had changed. I realized that she had been listening to my internal complaints and my lazy fantasies for the last 3 years. I had thought I was a great actor, but she had been reading my mind the entire time and manipulating me with ease. I playfully pinched her cheek and asked if she had been counting on my help the whole time. She admitted with a smile that she knew I was a genius the moment I called Joey Miller a moron in my head. I felt completely exposed, like a performer who had been found out by the audience. I asked why she had even mentioned the divorce, and she told me she just wanted to hear if I actually loved her. She laughed and told me that all she found in my head were thoughts of tropical vacations and beautiful women. I felt guilty and looked away, telling her that she still shouldn't have kissed me without permission. She argued that she was my wife and that she had every right to kiss me whenever she wanted. She added that she could feel my heart racing every time she touched me, regardless of how much I complained internally. I had no defense. Within a year, I had officially moved out of the guest house and into her massive master bedroom. She kept her word and bought us a stunning private island in the South Pacific. She told me that the island was our new home. One night, she finally surprised me by wearing the black lace bikini I had dreamed about. Seeing her look so beautiful and vulnerable destroyed any desire I had to leave her. I realized that being with her was better than any lazy retirement. A year later, we were relaxing on our private island. I was lying on the sand with a cold drink, enjoying the perfect tropical weather in my board shorts. Miriam looked like a goddess in her red bikini as she splashed around in the crystal clear water. She was no longer the cold executive I had married, but a happy and loving woman. She called out for me to join her in the ocean. I smiled and headed toward her. Her company had grown into a global superpower under our combined efforts. She ran the business perfectly, though I was always there to give her the occasional mental tip on a major deal. I would think to myself that a certain European deal was a bad idea because the other company was hiding their debt. I would suggest that she invest in certain tech startups that I knew were going to change the world. Every time a thought crossed my mind, Miriam would immediately act on it and make the right move for the company. We had developed a perfect rhythm in our marriage. She swam over to me and wrapped her arms around my neck. I told her that I had finally accepted that being a semi-retired husband to a beautiful woman was a pretty good deal. It was definitely more entertaining than being alone on an island with nothing to do. Miriam gave me a beautiful smile and whispered in my ear that she thought she was developing a new ability as well. I was confused until she took my hand and placed it on her stomach, telling me she could hear our unborn child's thoughts. I was shocked and immediately thought to myself, asking if it was a boy or a girl. A tiny, annoyed voice echoed in both of our heads, complaining about an old man touching them. Miriam started laughing at me while I looked at my own hand in disbelief. I realized that I was probably going to be at the bottom of the family hierarchy very soon. The sun was shining and the wind was warm as we looked forward to the next chapter of our lives together.